If you walk out that door, Eli, don't expect me to take you back.
I'm not asking you to take me back.
He promised he'd never let me go until I finally walked away. If you walk out that door, Eli, don't expect me to take you back. My hand was already on the handle. I'm not asking you to take me back. I pulled it open. Cold air hit my face. And there, across the street, under the street lamp, was Philip, waiting. Not pushing, just there. 3 months earlier, my entire life still revolved around Sebastian. It was a Friday night, and I'd been ready since 6. Candles, his favorite playlist, the good plates I only use for occasions. He'd promised he'd be there by 7. I watched the clock hit 8, then 9, texting less each hour. Not because I stopped caring, but because I'd learned that caring too loudly only ever got me called dramatic. When he finally walked in past 10, smelling faintly like a bar I didn't recognize, he didn't apologize first. He noticed the candles, half burned down, and let out a short laugh. You didn't have to do all this. You said 7, I said quietly. Something came up. You know how work gets. He shrugged off his jacket like the conversation was already over. You could have texted. You're too sensitive, Elle. He said it easily, like it was simply a fact about the weather. Then his voice softened, and he crossed the room, pulling me into him before I could protest. I'm here now. Isn't that what matters? And that was the trick of it, because Sebastian, up close, was warm and familiar and said my name like it meant something. I let myself be held. Let myself forgive it. Again, this was the shape our relationship had taken over 2 years. Hurt, followed by charm, followed by forgiveness. I gave so easily it barely felt like a choice anymore. There were other things too, small things I noticed, and then talked myself out of noticing. A phone he angled away from me at dinner. A name, Marco, that flashed across his lock screen at 11 at night, followed by a hurried wrong number. Ignore that. Weekends that used to be ours, now eaten up by trips I wasn't invited on. I wasn't naive. I noticed. I just didn't let myself follow the thought all the way to its end, because the end of that thought meant admitting something I wasn't ready to admit, that the man I'd built 2 years of my life around might not be building anything back. If you're already feeling for me right now, stick around. This story only gets more emotional from here. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss where it goes. That Friday night ended the way most of our nights did. Sebastian falling asleep first, arms slung over me, and me lying awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, counting the good moments instead of the bad ones, telling myself the math still worked out in his favor. I didn't know yet that in 3 months, I'd be standing in a doorway, choosing between the man currently sleeping beside me and a stranger I hadn't met yet. I didn't know Philip's name would ever matter to me at all, but some nights are the last quiet ones before everything changes. This was one of them. It didn't mean anything, he said. Like 2 years meant less than that. I found out on a Tuesday. Not because I was looking, because his phone buzzed on the counter while he was in the shower, and the name on the screen was Marco again, except this time the message didn't say wrong number. It said, last night was everything I needed. I stood there holding his phone like it might burn me if I gripped it too hard. Some part of me, the part that had spent 2 years building excuses out of nothing, was already trying to find another explanation. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe if I just put the phone down and never mentioned it, I could keep living in the version of my life where Sebastian loved only me. But I didn't put it down. When he came out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, hair still dripping, he saw my face before he saw the phone in my hand. And something in his expression shifted. Not panic exactly. More like a man watching a door finally close that he'd been propping open for a long time. How long? I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He didn't lie. I'll give him that much. Ellie. How long, Sebastian? For months. He said it quietly, like saying it softly might make it hurt less. It didn't. For months. For months of Friday nights, I spent lighting candles for a man who was somewhere else entirely. For months of forgiving lateness that was never about work. For months of me calling myself sensitive for noticing things that were apparently exactly what they looked like. Why? I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. Sebastian ran a hand through his wet hair, and for a second he looked almost helpless, like he wanted an answer that would make this okay for both of us. It didn't mean anything. I want to tell you that's what broke me. Not the cheating. Not Marco's name on the screen. It was that sentence. Because if 4 months meant nothing to him, what did the other 20 mean? What did I mean? It didn't mean anything. I repeated, and something in my chest went very quiet, very still, the kind of quiet that comes right before everything falls apart. Then what have I been fighting for? He didn't have an answer for that. Sebastian never did, when it actually mattered. If you've ever had someone make you feel like your pain was an overreaction, you already know exactly what this moment cost me. Stay with me. There's a lot more of this story to go. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. I left that night. I didn't pack much, just what I could carry and still see through the tears blurring my vision. Sebastian said my name once as I walked out, quiet, almost pleading. I didn't turn around. I checked into a motel 2 blocks from our apartment because I couldn't think past 2 blocks. I sat on the edge of a stiff, unfamiliar bed and stared at my phone, half expecting, half hoping it would ring. It didn't. Somewhere in that silence, I realized something that scared me more than the betrayal itself. I still wanted to go back. Not because Sebastian deserved it, because leaving didn't feel like relief. It felt like free falling with nothing underneath me. I didn't know yet that in 3 days, at a coffee shop I only wandered into because it was raining, I'd meet someone who would eventually stand under a street lamp waiting for me to choose him. I didn't know that some doors close so new ones can open. I just knew that night, lying in a motel bed that wasn't mine, that the man I built my whole world around had just told me, in 5 words, that I was never the center of his. I wasn't looking for anyone. He just stayed. 3 days after I left Sebastian, I was still living out of a duffel bag in a motel room that smelled like stale coffee and other people's cigarettes. I hadn't told my friends everything yet, just enough to explain why I wasn't answering the way I used to. It was raining the day. I wandered into the coffee shop on the corner of 5th, mostly because I didn't want to go back to that room, and the motel lobby didn't have anywhere to sit that wasn't under fluorescent light. I ordered something I don't even remember, sat at a table by the window, and stared at nothing for a long time. I didn't notice him at first. Just a guy a few tables over, reading, occasionally glancing up at the rain like he was in no hurry to be anywhere else. It was the barista who caused it, actually. She dropped a stack of mugs near the counter, and I flinched so hard I knocked my coffee straight into my lap. Here, a napkin appeared in front of me before I even looked up. The guy from the other table, dark stubble, sandy brown hair, kind, steady eyes, was already holding out a second one. You look like you were somewhere else. Sorry, didn't mean to startle you further. It's fine, I said, dabbing uselessly at my jeans. Long few days. He didn't ask what kind of days. He just said, want me to grab you a new one? On me. Least I can do since the universe apparently wants you soaked. I laughed before I meant to. It surprised me. I hadn't laughed in 3 days. You don't have to do that. I know. He was already walking to the counter. His name was Philip. He came back with a fresh coffee, and instead of sitting back down at his own table, he asked if he could sit, not like he expected yes, more like he'd genuinely take no for an answer if I gave it. I didn't. We talked for almost an hour. Nothing deep. He was finishing a graduate program, originally from London, still adjusting to how Americans over-ice everything. He asked normal questions, and let me give normal answers. And somehow, that was exactly what I needed. Someone who wasn't asking why my eyes were swollen or why I was carrying a duffel bag into a coffee shop in the rain. When I finally stood to leave, he didn't ask for my number. He just said, this is my regular spot most mornings if you're ever back this way. No pressure behind it. Just an open door. I didn't expect to take him up on it. But 2 mornings later, I was back at that same table, and so was he. If you already like Philip more than you're supposed to this early, trust me, you're not alone. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is only the beginning of what he means to this story. Over the next few weeks, if you're ever back this way became a pattern I didn't plan but didn't stop either. Philip never asked about Sebastian directly. I brought him up myself, eventually in pieces, the late nights, the excuses, the ending that wasn't really an ending yet, since Sebastian still texted sometimes, careful, testing. Philip listened. He didn't tell me what to do. He didn't tell me Sebastian was a bad person, even when I half wanted him to, just so someone else could be angry on my behalf. Instead, one morning when I admitted I still didn't know if I'd done the right thing leaving, Philip just said, "You don't have to decide tonight. Not he's terrible, forget him. Not you deserve so much better. Just permission to not have it figured out yet." I didn't know it then, but that sentence would end up meaning more to me than almost anything Sebastian ever said in 2 years. I still didn't know what I wanted, but for the first time since the phone buzzed on that counter, I wasn't dreading the next morning. I was looking forward to it. Told myself it was just coffee. It was never just coffee. Weeks passed, and somewhere in the space of ordinary mornings, Philip became a habit I didn't examine too closely. I moved out of the motel into a small apartment across town, smaller than the one I'd share with Sebastian, cheaper mine. Philip helped me carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs without being asked twice, sweating through his t-shirt, complaining the whole time in a way that somehow made the work feel lighter instead of heavier. "You know," he said, setting down a box labeled kitchen, fragile, "probably not. You didn't have to bribe me with coffee for this." "I didn't bribe you with anything. You mentioned croissants. That's a bribe, Eli." But he was smiling when he said it, and something in my chest did something complicated and warm that I chose not to think about too hard. Sebastian texted sometimes. "Careful. Testing messages. Hope the new place is treating you well," or "saw something today that reminded me of you." I never knew what to do with those. Some nights I'd stare at them for a long time before typing something short and neutral back. Other nights I didn't answer at all and felt guilty for it in a way I couldn't quite justify. I still loved him. That was the complicated truth I hadn't said out loud to anyone, not even Philip. 2 years doesn't just evaporate because someone finally shows you the truth. Some nights, I still reach for my phone wanting to tell Sebastian something stupid and small, the way I used to before I remembered I wasn't supposed to want that anymore. Philip never made me feel guilty about any of it. That was the strange part. When I mentioned Sebastian's name, his jaw would tighten just slightly, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, and I was more than I wanted to admit, but he never said a bad word about him. Never told me who I should or shouldn't still care about. "You get to feel however you feel," he told me once, over coffee that had gone cold an hour ago because we'd been talking too long to notice. "I'm not going anywhere, just because your heart's complicated right now." I looked at him for a second too long after he said that. He looked back, and neither of us looked away first. It was a Tuesday when I first felt the shift, really felt it, not just noticed it happening. Philip had shown up at my apartment with soup because I'd mentioned in passing days earlier that I always got sick during the first cold snap of the year. I hadn't expected him to remember. I definitely hadn't expected him to show up at my door with a grocery bag and a slightly embarrassed look, like he wasn't sure if this was too much. "You remembered that," I said, staring at the bag like it might disappear if I blinked. "You said it once. 2 weeks ago." He shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal, like remembering small things about people wasn't a rare and precious thing that almost no one had ever done for me. "Figured you could use it." I let him in. We ended up on my couch, the soup forgotten and cooling on the counter, watching some show neither of us was really paying attention to. At some point his arm ended up along the back of the couch behind me. Not quite touching, close enough that I was aware of every inch of the space between us. I thought about leaning into it. I thought about it so hard my chest ached. I didn't. Not that night. But I noticed, walking him to the door 2 hours later, that I didn't want him to leave. And I noticed, lying awake after, that I hadn't thought about Sebastian once the entire evening. Not until right then, in the quiet, when guilt crept back in like it always did, right on schedule. I was falling for Philip. I knew it before I let myself admit it, the way you know it's raining before you actually look up and feel it on your face. The problem was, I still hadn't figured out what to do with the part of me that hadn't fully let go of Sebastian. And I had a feeling that part of me was about to be tested. He never fought for me until he thought he'd lose me for good. Sebastian showed up at my apartment on a Thursday I hadn't planned for. I opened the door expecting a delivery, and instead there he was, hands in his pockets, looking somehow smaller than I remembered him, standing in the hallway like he wasn't sure he had the right to be there. "Can we talk?" he asked. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." I should have said no. I almost did. But 2 years doesn't let go of you just because you finally let go of it and some stubborn, tired part of me still wanted to hear whatever he'd come to say. I let him in. He looked around my new apartment like he was cataloging everything I'd built without him. The mismatched furniture, the plant Philip had given me that I hadn't managed to kill yet, the space that was entirely, unmistakably mine. "You look good," he said. "Happier. What do you want, Sebastian?" He exhaled slowly, and for the first time in 2 years, I watched Sebastian struggle to find words instead of reaching for the easy, practiced ones. "I want you to know I've been seeing someone. A therapist. Since you left." That surprised me. He must have seen it on my face, because something like hope flickered across his. I know I don't get to just say that and expect it to fix anything. I know 4 months of lying isn't erased because I finally started doing the work I should have done years ago. He stepped closer, careful, like he was approaching something fragile. "But I love you, Eli. I think some part of me has always loved you, the only way I knew how, which apparently wasn't enough, and I'm trying to learn how to actually be worth staying for." I felt my resolve waver, just slightly, and I hated myself for it. Because he sounded sincere. Because I wanted him to be sincere. Because loving someone for 2 years doesn't just switch off, even when they've earned every reason for it to. "You can't just say the right things now that you're scared of losing me," I said, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. "I know." He reached for my hand, and I let him take it, which terrified me more than anything he could have said. "I'm not asking you to forgive 4 months in one conversation. I'm asking for a chance to be the person I should have been from the start." I didn't answer him that night. I couldn't. I just told him I needed time, and he nodded like he'd expected that, like he understood, for once, that he didn't get to rush this. After he left, I sat on my couch for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling like the ground beneath me had shifted without warning. I still loved him. That hadn't changed. And now, for the first time, he was finally offering something that looked like the version of him I'd always hoped existed underneath the mess. I thought about calling Philip. I didn't. Not that night. I didn't know what I would even say. The man who broke my heart just showed up and might be changing, and I don't know what that means for us felt too complicated for a phone call 11 at night. 2 days later, I finally saw Philip again, and he must have noticed something in my face, because he didn't ask what was wrong right away. He just made 2 coffees and sat across from me and waited. When I finally told him about Sebastian showing up, about the therapy, about the apology that sounded almost too careful to be fake, Philip went quiet for a long moment. "Do you believe him?" he finally asked. Not accusing, genuinely asking. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe. Some of it." Philip nodded slowly, and something passed behind his eyes that he tried to hide and didn't quite manage. "Then you should figure that out. Really figure it out. Not for me. For you." Philip dash. "I mean it, Eli." His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something that caused him to say, "If you still love him, if there's a real chance with him, you should go find out. I'd rather lose you to something real than keep you, because you're too afraid to check." I stared at him, stunned, because that was the moment I understood, all at once, the difference between the two of them. Sebastian fought to keep me by finally, desperately becoming someone worth staying for. Philip fought for me by being willing to let me go. Neither answer made the choice easier. If anything, it made it so much harder. If you've ever had to choose between the safety of someone new and the pull of someone familiar, you already know exactly how impossible this feels. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The choice is coming, and you won't want to miss it. That night, I lay awake again, except this time it wasn't guilt keeping me up. It was the terrifying, undeniable truth that I had to choose. Not eventually. Not someday. Soon. I finally understood the difference between being loved and being loved right. I told Sebastian I needed one more conversation before I gave him an answer. He agreed, too quickly, like he'd been waiting by his phone for exactly that message. So there I was again, back in the apartment I used to call home, standing across from the man I'd spent 2 years of my life loving. "I've thought about everything you said," I told him. "The therapy, the apology, all of it." And his voice was careful, hopeful in a way that used to undo me completely. "And I believe you're trying. I really do." I took a breath, steadying myself for what came next. "But Sebastian, Trying isn't the same as having already changed. And I can't go back to who I was with you just because you're finally becoming someone better. I deserve someone who is already there. Something in his face cracked. Eli, please. Just give me the chance to prove Dash. If you walk out that door, Eli, don't expect me to take you back. His voice rose, panic edging into desperation, echoing words he'd said to me once before, except this time the threat sounded hollow instead of powerful. I'm not saying that to hurt you. I'm saying it because I'm terrified of losing you for good. I felt the old pull, that familiar ache that had kept me forgiving him for 2 years. But underneath it, for the first time, I felt something steadier, something that didn't need him to survive. I loved you, I said quietly. I don't think that was ever a lie, but I can't keep confusing loving you with losing myself. I turned toward the door. My hand found the handle, the same handle I'd gripped 3 months earlier, except this time there was no hesitation in it. I pulled it open. Cold air hit my face, and there, across the street, under the street lamp, exactly where I'd left him standing when I asked him to wait, was Philip. He hadn't known which way tonight would go. I hadn't told him. He'd simply shown up anyway, because that's who he was, the kind of person who waited without demanding, who loved without needing guarantees. I didn't look back at Sebastian this time. I walked toward Philip instead, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the city around me. When I reached him, he searched my face carefully, like he was afraid to hope too much. I didn't choose the man who hurt me, I said, my voice breaking slightly around the words. Philip went very still. Eli, I chose the man who taught me I was worth loving. I let out a shaky breath, tears finally slipping free, except this time they didn't feel like grief. They felt like relief. I chose you. If you'll still have me. Are you sure? He asked softly, like he needed to hear it clearly, like he wasn't willing to let me rush into anything, even now. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I said yes. I'm sure. He closed the distance between us, and when he kissed me, it didn't feel like fireworks or desperation or the frantic highs I'd mistaken for love with Sebastian. It felt steady. It felt like coming home to somewhere I hadn't known I was allowed to belong. When we finally pulled back, Philip rested his forehead gently against mine, both of us breathing like we'd been holding our breath for 3 months straight. For what it's worth, he murmured, I would have waited as long as it took. I know, I said. That's exactly why I chose you. We stood together under that street lamp for a long time, the city moving around us, indifferent to the fact that my entire world had just quietly rearranged itself into something that finally made sense. I used to believe that loving someone meant enduring whatever pain came with them, that the depth of my suffering somehow proved the depth of my love. I know better now. Love isn't supposed to cost you yourself. And for the first time in my life, I finally chose the kind of love that didn't ask me to disappear to keep it. Ich chose Philippe. Ich chose Eling. I chose me. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the stories here on Nightfall BL Stories.
Ready to head back?
Thank you so much for watching. The end.